Imagine a world where Napoleon Bonaparte emerged victorious from the Battle of Waterloo on June 18, 1815. How different would our world be today? A question that has piqued the interest of historians, philosophers, and even casual observers of history. Why, you might ask? Well, the Battle of Waterloo was no ordinary skirmish. It was a pivotal moment in European history, a crossroads where power, ambition, and destiny collided on a muddy battlefield in present-day Belgium. It marked the end of the Napoleonic Wars, a series of conflicts that shook Europe for over a decade. In our reality, the battle spelled the final defeat for Napoleon Bonaparte, the audacious French emperor who had dominated the European continent with his military prowess and political acumen. The loss at Waterloo led to his exile to the remote island of St. Helena, where he would spend the rest of his days far from the empire he had built and lost. But let's shift our gaze to a different reality, where the echoes of cannon fire fade into cheers of victory for Napoleon and his Grande Armée. The Battle of Waterloo in this parallel world is not a symbol of defeat, but a beacon of triumph. The implications of such an outcome are as vast as they are fascinating. In this altered timeline, the immediate aftermath of the battle would have been a stark contrast to what actually transpired. The continuation of the Napoleonic Wars would have been a likely scenario, with the French morale bolstered by their leader's victory. The sense of nationalism in France, already ignited by the French Revolution and fanned by Napoleon's reign, could have reached new heights. The ripple effect of this unseen victory would have extended far beyond the battlefield, influencing political power dynamics, reshaping territorial boundaries, and even altering global colonial patterns. The spread of revolutionary ideals and the cultural fabric of the 19th century could have been woven differently under the influence of a victorious Napoleon. In this world, Napoleon's triumph at Waterloo would have changed the course of history, starting with the immediate aftermath of the battle. And as we delve deeper into this alternate reality, we'll explore how this single victory could have echoed through the corridors of time, altering the world as we know it. With a victory at Waterloo, Napoleon would have continued his reign, and the Napoleonic Wars would have rolled on. Napoleon, the charismatic general, maintaining his grip on power, orchestrating the chessboard of Europe as he saw fit. The wars that bore his name would have likely persisted, with the battle lines redrawn, alliances reshuffled, and the stakes ever escalating. These wars were not merely about territorial dominance, but about the spread of ideas, the clash of old and new world orders. Napoleon, the beacon of the French Revolution, carried its principles into battle: liberty, equality, fraternity. A triumphant Napoleon would have been a soaring morale booster for France. The nation, battered and bruised from years of conflict, would have found renewed vigor, a fresh gust of wind in their sails. Victory at Waterloo could have sparked a surge in French nationalism. The sense of national pride, already kindled by the French Revolution, would have been stoked further by this triumph. The French people, under the banner of Napoleon, unified in victory, could have ridden this wave of nationalistic fervor to new heights. But let's not forget about the man himself, Napoleon. His image, his persona would have been magnified. Think about it. Napoleon, the indomitable leader, the strategic genius, the embodiment of the revolutionary spirit, emerging victorious against the combined might of Europe's powers. His legend would have grown, his influence deepened, his hold over the French imagination strengthened. It's also worth considering the psychological impact. The fear, the awe, the respect that Napoleon commanded across Europe would have been amplified. His opponents, already wary of his military prowess, would have been forced to reassess their strategies, their alliances, their very understanding of warfare. But the effects of Napoleon's victory would not stop at the battlefield. It would have far-reaching political implications. Victory at Waterloo would have bolstered Napoleon's empire, creating a shift in European power dynamics. This alternate reality would have seen Napoleon's rule solidified and expanded, possibly leading to a more stable Napoleonic empire. Imagine, if you will, a Europe where the Napoleonic Empire remained a dominant force. The French Empire, which had been built on the principles of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, and fraternity, would have continued to thrive under Napoleon's command. It's not a stretch to suggest that these principles would have been further embedded into the societal fabric of Napoleon's territories, possibly even extending beyond France's borders. Stability, however, is a tricky word to pin down. Napoleon's rule was often marked by conflict, both internal and external. The stability we speak of isn't the absence of conflict, but the presence of a strong centralized power that could quell dissidents and maintain control. This is the kind of stability Napoleon could have brought to his empire with a victory at Waterloo. But what about the rest of Europe? How would the balance of power have shifted? Well, the answer to that lies in understanding the Napoleonic Wars. These wars rewrote the political landscape of Europe, toppling centuries-old dynasties and redistributing power. A Napoleon victory at Waterloo could have potentially tipped the scales permanently in France's favor. Consider the Holy Roman Empire, a significant political entity of the era. It was already disintegrating under Napoleon's assaults. A Waterloo victory could have hastened its downfall, solidifying France's position as the dominant power in Central Europe. Similarly, the British Empire, another major player, would have faced an existential crisis. Britain's influence and power were inextricably tied to its opposition to Napoleon. A defeat at Waterloo would have drastically weakened Britain's standing, providing Napoleon with an opportunity to challenge British supremacy, especially on the high seas. In essence, a Napoleon victory at Waterloo could have led to a Europe where France was the unchallenged hegemon, a reality that would have drastically differed from the Europe we know today. Such political changes would naturally lead to territorial adjustments across Europe. With Napoleon at the helm of a victorious France, the map of Europe may have looked quite different. A triumphant Napoleon would likely have redrawn the borders to consolidate his empire's power and further his influence. Some countries might have disappeared entirely, swallowed up by an expanding French Empire, while others, particularly those showing loyalty to Napoleon, might have seen their territories expand. To the east, Russia, a major player in the Napoleonic Wars, could have faced significant territorial losses. Meanwhile, the United Kingdom, Napoleon's persistent adversary, might have been forced to cede some of its holdings. On the other hand, the German states, which were largely fragmented at the time, could have been unified under French influence, accelerating the process that historically took place later in the century. These hypothetical boundary adjustments are not just lines on a map. They represent shifts in power, culture, and identity. These territorial changes would have a profound global impact, particularly on colonial empires. Victorious Napoleon would have left an indelible mark on global colonial patterns and legal and social reforms. Let's first consider colonial empires. At the time of the Battle of Waterloo, the world was in the throes of colonial expansion. The British Empire was spreading its wings across the globe, while France was trying to regain its lost territories. Had Napoleon won at Waterloo, France's colonial ambitions might have taken a different trajectory. Perhaps a more aggressive French Empire would have challenged the British supremacy in India or the Spanish control in the Americas. We might have seen a French India or French colonies in Africa decades before they actually happened. Now, let's turn our attention to the spread of Napoleonic legal and social reforms. Napoleon's Civil Code, also known as the Napoleonic Code, was a revolutionary legal document. It proclaimed equality of all citizens before the law, the right to choose a profession, religious tolerance, and the abolition of serfdom and all feudal rights. This code later influenced legal systems around the world, from Latin America to Japan. But if Napoleon had won at Waterloo, the dissemination of these progressive legal ideas might have been accelerated, leading to earlier social reforms globally. Moreover, Napoleon's strong belief in meritocracy, the idea that individuals should be rewarded based on their talent and performance rather than their birth status, could have spread more widely, challenging the entrenched aristocratic structures not just in Europe, but also in colonized countries. This could have potentially led to earlier democratic movements and the rise of new social classes. In essence, a victorious Napoleon could have reshaped the world in more ways than one. His influence would have extended beyond the borders of Europe, leaving a lasting imprint on the legal, social, and political fabric of the world. This victory would not only have global implications, but would also influence nationalism and revolutionary movements. The triumph of Napoleon would have invigorated the rise of nationalism and liberal and national movements. Imagine a world where the Lion of France roared louder and prouder than ever before. A world where Napoleon's victory at Waterloo sparked a flame that ignited the hearts of many across Europe. The influence of such a triumph would have been monumental, particularly on the rise of nationalism and revolutionary movements. Napoleon, with his charisma and military prowess, was a figure many looked up to. His victory would have bolstered French nationalism, while simultaneously inspiring movements in other nations. Remember, this was a time when ideas traveled just as warriors did, on horseback and by ship. In this alternate timeline, the ideals of French Revolution, liberty, equality, and fraternity, would have continued to resonate far and wide, lending momentum to burgeoning nationalistic sentiments across Europe. Just picture it. In Germany, for instance, the flames of nationalism would have been stoked, potentially leading to a unified German state much earlier than in our timeline. In Italy, the seeds of the Risorgimento, a movement for the unification of Italy, might have blossomed sooner, fueled by the Napoleonic victory. Beyond nationalism, Napoleon's win could have energized liberal movements. His progressive legal reforms, popularly known as the Napoleonic Code, promoted equality before the law, property rights, and secularism. These ideas were revolutionary for the time and could have sparked liberal movements across Europe, clamoring for similar reforms. In essence, Napoleon's victory at Waterloo would have been like a stone thrown into the still waters of Europe, sending ripples of change across nations. It would have spurred the rise of nationalism, brought about the early unification of nations, and accelerated liberal movements demanding equality and secularism. This victory would also leave a significant cultural and ideological legacy. The flame of revolution ignited by Napoleon would have burned brighter and longer, casting a lasting shadow on the canvas of history. The Napoleonic era, extended by a victory at Waterloo, would have shaped the cultural fabric of the 19th century. With Napoleon at the helm, a new cultural epoch may have dawned, one that would have been deeply influenced by the ideals and values of the man himself. A victory at Waterloo could have further fueled the Romantic movement that was already taking root in Europe. Romanticism, with its emphasis on emotion, individualism, and the glorification of the past, might have found a strong patron in Napoleon, a man known for his grandiose visions and dramatic flair. Imagine a world where the Romantic artists and poets found inspiration not in the ruins of Napoleon's empire, but in its triumphs. This could have led to a different kind of Romanticism, one that celebrated victory and power rather than lamenting loss and defeat. Beyond Romanticism, Napoleon's victory could have shaped culture in more tangible ways. The Napoleonic Code, with its emphasis on civil liberties and equality, might have found its way into the cultural norms and practices of the time, fostering a culture of equality and justice. Napoleon's fascination with the sciences and the arts could have led to a cultural renaissance of sorts. His patronage may have resulted in significant advancements in these fields, leading to a more enlightened and progressive society. Moreover, Napoleon's victory could have changed the language of culture. French, already a lingua franca, might have become even more dominant, shaping literature, philosophy, and even everyday conversation across Europe and beyond. The cultural legacy of Napoleon's victory at Waterloo would have been profound. It would have created a world where Romanticism, equality, and the French language reigned supreme. However, as with any significant historical event, this victory would not have been without its downsides. The cultural changes brought about by Napoleon's victory could have been a double-edged sword, leading to both progression and conflict. However, this victory would also have economic consequences. The continued warfare resulting from Napoleon's victory would have had significant economic impacts. Much like a game of dominoes, the continued warfare would have put a strain on national economies across Europe. Resources would have been heavily taxed to support the ongoing conflict. Infrastructure would have taken a hit, affecting trade and commerce. The economies, particularly of England and Prussia, would have been stretched thin, straining under the weight of the war. In France, the story would have been similar. The French economy, already stretched from years of warfare, would face further hardship. Napoleon's ambitious plans for expansion and reform would have required significant funding, a heavy burden on the French economy. On the flip side, this could have spurred on industrial development as nations raced to find more efficient ways to fund the war effort. The world could have seen an accelerated pace of industrial revolution, a silver lining in the cloud of warfare. All of these outcomes hinge on speculative alternatives that could have followed Napoleon's victory. Would Napoleon's victory have led to his eventual defeat or a diplomatic settlement? Now, that's a question that would stir the pot of history. Had Napoleon emerged victorious at Waterloo, the world might have seen two major scenarios. First, an eventual defeat. Even with a win at Waterloo, Napoleon would still have had to face the formidable forces of the Seventh Coalition. His resources were dwindling, and the odds of a later defeat were high. Alternatively, a diplomatic settlement could have been reached. A triumphant Napoleon might have been able to negotiate peace, leading to a restructured Europe. The balance of power would have shifted, with France and its allies gaining significant influence. Each scenario would have had its own set of consequences, reshaping the world as we know it. In essence, Napoleon's victory at Waterloo would have created a ripple effect, altering not just the political landscape of Europe, but potentially affecting global colonial patterns, the spread of revolutionary ideals, and the cultural fabric of the 19th century. So, what if Napoleon had won the Battle of Waterloo? We've journeyed through the potential aftermaths, political implications, territorial changes, global impacts, revolutionary influences, cultural legacies, economic consequences, and speculative alternatives. Each offers a glimpse into an alternative timeline where Napoleon's triumph at Waterloo alters the course of history. A victory would have likely perpetuated the Napoleonic Wars, reignited French morale, and reshaped European power dynamics. Boundary adjustments could have seen Napoleon's empire expand, possibly influencing colonial patterns worldwide. Coupled with the spread of Napoleonic legal and social reforms, this could have ignited an upsurge in nationalism and revolutionary movements. The cultural and ideological legacy, as well as the economic consequences of continued warfare, would have painted a different picture of the 19th century. However, these are all speculative scenarios, hinging on a complex interplay of military, political, and social factors in the years following the battle. The exact outcomes would depend on a complex interplay of military, political, and social factors in the years following the battle. But one thing is for sure, our world would have been a very different place.